All right, Stephen, we had a story we wanted to take a little bit of a closer look at. It's actually a couple of stories because Intel is not just in the news for their consumer chip lines. They're looking to expand their entire chip making facilities outside of the US. Our first story involves a huge $25 billion investment in chip making in Israel. Man, that's a big amount. Intel will pay increased taxes on this factory, but they're also going to get a bigger grant for the total investment if the conditions of the investment are met upon completion of the project. The factory is expected to open in 2027. It will operate through at least 2035. That's a good, healthy lifetime at the minimum. The second big investment comes in Germany, where the government has agreed to provide an additional $10 billion in subsidies for a fabrication facility in Magdeburg. Apologies for all of my German listeners out there. Both of these announcements come on the heels of a testing facility and packaging facility that's being built in Poland. Now, Stephen, I know that Intel is looking to make these big investments because they know that they need to ramp up their fabrication facilities. But why are they trying to expand non US operations after all of the work that they did to get the CHIPS Act passed?
Yeah, I think that this is a sign that Intel is playing the big ball game that they need to play. Let's get that out there right off the bat. So when Pat Gelsinger came back to Intel, one of the things that he said, and one of the things I think that most analysts and casual observers would agree to, is that Intel really needs to get its manufacturing back up and up to full speed in order to effectively compete in the semiconductor market. The company has honestly always done a great job in the chip design side. Sometimes, well, not as great a job, but still, the company has made competitive products again and again and again for decades. Manufacturing as well. Intel was always in the lead until it wasn't. Until the previous era when Intel's manufacturing really fell behind, to the point that Intel is now outsourcing manufacturing of some components to TSMC, which has got to make those people crazy. So Intel, as I argued when Pat came back, and as I've been arguing on this rundown ever since, Intel needs to bet the company on manufacturing, and it needs to succeed. This is the whole ball game, and this is what Intel is doing. There's actually another thing going on. I'll point out today at 11:30. Intel is going to announce a financial change. At least that's what the analysts are saying. Allegedly, and again, I can't confirm this, it'll probably be published by the time the rundown is published, but allegedly, the change will be that Intel is going to actually reveal numbers of the hardware and manufacturing side along with the chip design side. And again, I feel like this is a way of Pat Gelsinger lighting a fire underneath these people and saying, look, this needs to succeed or there is no Intel. There's no reason for Intel to exist if it can't be on the front leading end of manufacturing. The same thing is true of these factories. Israel, Germany, the semi fab that they're building right here in Ohio, the assembly and testing that you talked about in Poland, in Wrocław, Poland, that they're building as well. All of this is about Intel betting that it can get the manufacturing house in order, and not just get it in order, but get it in order in a way that's ahead of the competition. And if you look at this, where is Intel building this stuff? The United States, and we know that the U.S. government wants locally manufactured chips and is willing to subsidize those. The European Union, specifically Germany, again, the German and the European market wants homegrown chip manufacturing capability as well, and they're going to get that from Intel. And they're willing to put their money where their mouth is after a little bit of a game of chicken over the last few weeks over will this happen or won't this happen? Yeah, it's going to happen, and Germany's going to put up the money to make it happen. Israel, if I was Israel and I was looking at the global situation and I looked at Taiwan and I looked at manufacturing in the US and I looked at relations with basically every other country in the world, I would want homegrown chip manufacturing capability as well. And that's what's going on here. In all of these cases, Intel is basically, if you pardon my stretching the metaphor, building new ballparks, investing in new expansion teams, and hoping that they can put a winner on the field. If they can, this puts Intel ahead of TSMC in the chip manufacturing market because of the fact that they will have brand new fabs with the latest technology operating all over the world, especially and notably in key markets for these products as local manufacturers. If they can't put together a compelling and competitive manufacturing position, well, at least they've got something to sell to the creditors.
And it's funny that you use that metaphor, Stephen, because it's actually one that I was going to use. I don't know if you're aware of this. Well, you are, but I don't know if our listeners are aware of this. The Oakland A's are having a ballpark built in Las Vegas, Nevada. 120 degree in the summer, Las Vegas, Nevada. Why on earth would you want to build a baseball park on the strip? Because Las Vegas is paying for it. That's the ultimate thing. When you look at what Intel is doing, and it's a brilliant move by Pat Gelsinger, and hey, full disclosure, Pat, I like him because he figured out how to get his factories built and not have to pay for all of them. Like that's the thing. I mean, I live in Oklahoma. We are the recipient of a basketball team where the city of Seattle didn't want to build them a new arena, so they moved. Like that's the thing. When you're operating on a global scale, it doesn't matter where your chips are as long as there's water and as long as there is access to a port somewhere, airport, seaport, whatever. Like you can build a factory just about anywhere. Now, obviously, you probably want to build it in a seismically stable location. Or there's other things going to it, but you don't have to only build it in Silicon Valley, or you don't have to only build it in Paris. You build it wherever you want. So then, what would be the sweetener? Well, just like a sports team, who's willing to pay? Like I want reduced taxes, or I want a big grant on the back end to offset those taxes that I'm paying you. And I think that that's why the Israeli situation is so interesting to me. Intel literally agreed to pay more in taxes. You never see that. But what they're effectively saying is we're going to inject money into the local economy through these taxes. And then at the end of it all, if we hold up on our end of the bargain and you hold up on your end of the bargain, we'll give you that plus some back in a grant that you can then use to, do whatever. And if the factory is a huge success, like you said, Intel's just going to keep operating it, right? Because at that point, it's a sunk cost. We've already paid off the construction and all that other stuff. If it's not a huge success, would you think that an Israeli company would want to go buy a very good fab that they could then operate however they see fit because it's sold to a company in Israel? I think that that's a big deal. And when you look at the fact that you want to stay out of China right now. And we've talked about this a lot. And when you look at the stories, especially the ones around Micron and what the US is doing with some of the companies, it's a geopolitical nightmare, right? If you put a fab in China, it has to be owned 51% by a Chinese company. There's no guarantee they're not going to get creative with the way they do things. And then you may end up losing the fab anyway. And let's be fair, if you're a foreign company operating in the US that's not TSMC, possibility exists that could happen too. So I think that Intel is kind of hedging their bets. They're getting funding from other countries. They're diversifying outside of the US in case something happens. It shouldn't, but it might. And they're providing valuable assets to recoup that cost. The irony of this whole thing, as we've talked about in the past, is that Pat Gelsinger is a nerd. He is focused on production. Bob Swan was the finance guy, and he didn't figure this out. You would figure the finance guy would want to build these plants in places where he could sell them if he needed to recoup that investment, and he never did. Pat did and is doing that, and I think that that ultimately is the genius of the whole thing. He gets a diversified supply chain, and he gets assets that he can effectively mortgage outside of the US should it come to that.
That's an interesting thing as well, Tom, that the just keep this in mind that this is it. If this works out, then Intel wins, and if this doesn't work out, then Intel doesn't win. And we can spend all the time we want talking about the next generation Xeons or packaging technologies or whatever it is. If Intel is able to get manufacturing in gear, none of it matters. Intel wins, because that's the thing. Even now, even in a time when there's so much intellectual property going on the design side, manufacturing always trumps it when you're talking about what we're talking about, which is basically ever shrinking features. So allegedly, Intel's going to be building the Intel 3, the 20 angstrom, the 18 angstrom process nodes in Germany. Probably they'll be deploying that stuff in Israel and the U.S. as well. And if Intel can do this, then they will be able to keep out ahead of competitors like AMD and NVIDIA, and they'll be able to attract customers, lucrative customers like Apple. And if they can't, well, it doesn't matter.